If you're so sharp, then translate. It's a simple sentence. A throwaway comment, really. But in that moment, when the CEO said those words, it felt like the world had just come to a screeching halt. Jordan's heart skipped a beat. He felt the weight of the insult linger in the air, thickening with every passing second. But it wasn't just the words. No, it wasn't just her arrogant sneer or the way she said it, as if daring him to prove her wrong. It was everything behind it. The assumption that because he was black and working as a waiter, he could never be more than that. That he couldn't possibly possess the intellect she was mocking. But Jordan wasn't just any waiter, and this wasn't just any insult. Jordan had been working at the Tasting Room, an upscale restaurant nestled in the heart of downtown, for over a year now. The restaurant was known for its elegance, for the rich and powerful who dined there, and for its perfect blend of exquisite dishes and wine. But Jordan? Jordan was a waiter, just another face behind the white tablecloths, serving the elite without ever being noticed. Every day he'd wake up early, slip into his uniform, and stand behind the bar, memorizing wine pairings and anticipating guest needs with a precision that made the job easier. But this wasn't what he dreamed of. He didn't want to be a waiter forever. Jordan wanted more, much more. Every plate he cleared, every glass of wine he served, it felt like time slipping away, dragging him further from the life he could almost taste, almost touch. He had dreams. Dreams of becoming something more than a forgotten face, serving food to people who couldn't care less about who he really was. But for now, he would bide his time, take the insults, the stares, and the side glances. Jordan was used to being underestimated. He'd been hearing it his whole life. But today was different. The CEO, Claire, had been coming to the tasting room for as long as Jordan could remember. A powerful woman in the tech world, dressed in sharp suits and radiating an air of superiority. She was used to getting what she wanted, and what she wanted today was to belittle Jordan. Claire ordered with her usual confidence, as though she had the entire world at her fingertips. "I'll have the foie gras, rare, with a glass of your best Chardonnay," she said, looking over her menu with a quick glance. The tone was commanding, a far cry from the polite requests Jordan had heard from most customers. But Jordan, being who he was, didn't flinch. He had served CEOs before. He had seen the arrogance. He had heard the rude comments. They didn't faze him anymore. It was when he returned to check on her meal that the moment of truth arrived. "You're doing well," Claire said, scanning him up and down. "But if you're so sharp," she paused, smirking, "then translate." Jordan froze. The words sliced through him, sharp and cold. He knew what she meant. It wasn't just a joke. It was a challenge that came with a kind of casual racism that people like Claire never thought twice about. "You know," she continued, with that all-too-familiar condescension in her voice, "I'm sure you must speak another language. You look like someone who would." Jordan's fingers tightened around the edge of the tray, but he didn't say a word. He couldn't. He was stunned, caught off guard by the audacity of her words. Claire didn't even wait for him to respond. She turned her attention back to her phone, dismissing him as if he were nothing more than a passing thought. And in that moment, Jordan's entire world shifted. This wasn't just another insult. It was the spark. Something deep inside Jordan stirred. He had always been told to keep quiet, to take the punches, to stay in his place. But today, Jordan realized something. Maybe it was time to stop taking it. Maybe it was time to show Claire and the world just how sharp he really was. The next few days at the tasting room felt different. Jordan could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, like something was just about to break. The comment Claire made, "If you're so sharp, then translate," kept playing over and over in his mind like a broken record that wouldn't stop. It wasn't just the insult itself. No, it was the weight of it. The way it implied that someone like him, someone black, someone from a working-class background, couldn't possibly be more than a server, more than a face behind the menu. It was the kind of thing Jordan had heard before, but it felt different this time. This time, it stung. For the next few shifts, he noticed things. Little things. Claire continued to come to the restaurant, always sitting at the same table near the back, her voice always cutting through the air, with that sharp, superior tone. But now it wasn't just Claire. Other customers, too, those who looked down on him without even realizing it. It wasn't just the looks, though. It was the way they spoke to him. Always dismissive, always as if he was meant to serve them and nothing more. And every time he caught their eyes, he felt it, the weight of their judgment. But it wasn't just the customers. His co-workers, too, seemed to sense a shift. The way they'd glance at him with pity or offer a half-hearted compliment about how good he was at his job felt almost patronizing. Everyone knew Jordan had a sharp mind, but no one really saw him for it, not in the way Claire had made so clear. The turning point came one afternoon, just a few days after Claire's initial remark. The restaurant was busier than usual, and Jordan was juggling multiple tables at once. But then he saw her again. Claire sitting at her usual spot, and this time, she wasn't just giving him a dismissive glance. She was looking at him like she knew something he didn't, like she was silently challenging him to rise to her challenge. Jordan wasn't sure why, but it was in that moment that something inside him snapped. The frustration, the anger, it all bubbled up to the surface. He had worked so hard to be seen, to prove he was more than just a waiter, but somehow people like Claire kept putting him in this box. This time he wasn't going to just take it. The next day, Jordan did something he had never done before. On his break, instead of going to the staff room, he walked to the local bookstore. He was tired of being underestimated, and there was one thing that Claire had said that kept echoing in his mind. If you're so sharp, then translate. So he took action. He picked up a language book, Spanish, French, and even a little Italian. Jordan wasn't sure why he chose those languages first, but he didn't need a reason. He had always been good at picking up languages. It wasn't something he had ever made public, but he had learned a few phrases here and there over the years, teaching himself during his downtime. But now he had a purpose. For the next few weeks, Jordan immersed himself in learning. He used every minute of free time he had to study. He listened to podcasts, read books, watched language tutorials online. Every time he practiced, he could feel his confidence growing. He was more than just a waiter, more than just someone who smiled and took orders. He was someone who had knowledge. He had talent. And the more he learned, the more his anger faded, replaced by something stronger. Determination. He was going to show Claire. He was going to show everyone. But it wasn't just Claire who kept crossing his mind. Jordan noticed his customers more now. Their behavior seemed so clear to him, almost as if he could read between the lines. The way they spoke to him, their condescension wrapped in polite words. He began to understand that it wasn't just about proving Claire wrong, it was about proving everyone wrong. The world was full of assumptions about people like him, but Jordan was done staying quiet. He had a plan, and when the time was right, he was going to execute it. The days seemed to stretch on, each one blending into the next. But Jordan didn't mind anymore. He had a purpose now. Every morning he woke up with determination. Every night he went to bed knowing he was a step closer to something greater. The words, "If you're so sharp, then translate," had ignited a fire within him, a fire that wouldn't be snuffed out until he had proved everyone wrong. Jordan had been studying relentlessly. He practiced speaking the languages he'd picked up, and the more he learned, the more confident he became. At first it was awkward. He stumbled over words, mispronounced phrases, but slowly he started getting the hang of it. It wasn't just about learning new languages anymore. It was about taking control of his own narrative. It was about showing everyone that he was more than what they saw on the surface. One evening the restaurant was packed, and Jordan could feel the familiar pressure mounting. It was an upscale evening with a full dining room, the kind of night that demanded precision and care. He moved from table to table, delivering drinks, clearing plates, and checking on customers, his focus sharp as ever. But then, there she was, Claire, sitting at her usual table in the corner, the light catching her sleek blonde hair as she tapped away on her phone. She looked up briefly when he approached, offering him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. That same smug expression, the one that made him feel like he was invisible. Jordan took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check. But the moment Claire looked at him, that familiar, dismissive gaze hit him like a brick. She was ordering wine for her meal, and this time, Jordan didn't just take the order. He stopped. He looked at her, and for the first time in months, he didn't feel like just another waiter. "Are you ready to order, ma'am?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an edge of confidence that wasn't there before. Claire glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, I'll have the foie gras, rare, with a glass of Chardonnay," she said in that patronizing way of hers. Jordan smiled, nodded, and went to grab her wine. As he returned with her drink, Claire glanced up, a small smirk on her lips. "So, tell me," she said, "do you still think you're smarter than most of these people?" Jordan hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. Was this the moment? The one he had been waiting for? The one where everything changed? The words from that fateful day replayed in his mind. "If you're so sharp, then translate." This time he didn't hesitate. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his gaze locking onto hers. "Si usted lo desea, puedo traducir todo lo que quiera." Her eyes widened. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice suddenly lacking that usual arrogance. Jordan repeated himself in a steady, confident tone. "I said, if you'd like, I can translate anything you want." Claire blinked, her mouth slightly agape. She didn't say anything for a moment, staring at him as if processing what just happened. Jordan wasn't done, though. "You see, Claire," Jordan continued, leaning in just a little closer, "I've been learning more than just how to serve food. I've been learning languages. Spanish, French, Italian. Maybe next time, I can even speak to you in Russian. But for now, I think this should be enough to prove something to you." Claire was stunned, completely and utterly speechless. She had expected him to falter, to be caught off guard, maybe even apologize for her snide remark. But instead she was left there, holding her wine glass with her mouth hanging slightly open. The confidence in Jordan's voice, the way he casually dropped the translation into the conversation, left her no room for a comeback. For a few seconds she just stared at him, lost for words. Then, as if snapped out of a trance, she quickly looked down at her menu, avoiding his gaze. The room around them seemed to fall into a quiet stillness, as if everyone could feel the tension in the air. But Jordan didn't care anymore. The satisfaction wasn't in her reaction. It was in his own. Jordan walked away, his heart pounding, but this time, it wasn't with anger. It was with pride. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had truly proven something. Not to her, not to anyone else, but to himself. As he walked back to the kitchen, he smiled to himself. This wasn't just a small victory, it was a moment of empowerment. For too long, people like Claire had underestimated him, had made him feel invisible. But now Jordan had shown them all that no matter where he came from or what they thought of him, he was more than capable. He was sharp. The restaurant buzzed with activity, the clinking of glasses and the hum of conversation filling the air. But for Jordan, it felt like the entire world had narrowed down to a single moment. The tension from the previous encounter with Claire still hung in the air, thick and charged. He had spoken in French, shown her just how sharp he was, but that was only the beginning. He knew Claire wasn't going to let it go, and he didn't want her to. It was around 9:30 p.m. when Claire arrived. The night was winding down, and the restaurant was less crowded, making it easier for the waitstaff to keep their focus. Jordan had hoped the day would pass quietly, that Claire would just eat her meal, finish her wine, and leave. But he knew that wasn't going to happen. As he stepped into the dining area to check on his tables, he saw her. She was sitting there looking up at him with that calculating gaze. It was as if she was waiting for him to make a move, waiting for him to crack under the pressure. But this time, Jordan didn't hesitate. He approached her table, his heart steady, his posture tall. "Good evening, Claire," he said, his voice calm. But there was a new edge to it. Confidence, strength, control. The kind of voice that commanded respect, even if you weren't in charge of the room. "Hello, Jordan," she said, her tone polite but cold. She barely looked at him as she adjusted the wine in her glass, her eyes flicking over the table, avoiding his gaze. But Jordan wasn't about to let her get away with pretending like nothing happened. "I noticed you didn't respond when I gave you the translation last time," Jordan said, his words measured. But the weight behind them was unmistakable. I thought you might have been too surprised to say anything, but now I think you're just avoiding the truth." Her eyes flicked up to meet his, her jaw tightening. Claire was no longer smirking. The arrogant woman who had insulted him so casually seemed to shrink under his gaze, as if for the first time she realized that her words might have consequences. "Don't act like this is some game, Jordan," Claire said, trying to regain control, but her voice wavered. It was the first time she had ever sounded uncertain in front of him. Jordan leaned in slightly, making sure she could hear him clearly. He wasn't going to back down this time. "No, Claire," he replied. "This isn't a game. This is about something bigger than you or me. It's about respect. It's about the fact that for so long, people like you have gotten away with underestimating people like me." Jordan's voice didn't raise, but it had a firmness to it, a conviction that made Claire's smirk falter. She didn't say anything for a moment, and the silence stretched out between them. She could feel the weight of his words, even if she didn't want to admit it. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone she had always seen as beneath her. But that was the thing about people like Jordan. They were used to being underestimated, used to being dismissed. And when you push them too far, when you try to belittle them one too many times, they start to push back. And when they push back, it's a force you can't ignore. For a moment, the room seemed to fall silent, like everyone around them was waiting for Claire to respond. But instead of giving her the satisfaction of an argument, Jordan turned to leave. As he walked away, Claire's voice suddenly cut through the air. "Wait, Jordan!" He stopped, his back still to her, but he knew what was coming. This was her last attempt to regain control, to salvage whatever dignity she had left in this situation. "I didn't mean it the way you think," she said, her tone softer now, almost apologetic. Jordan turned slowly, his gaze steady and unwavering. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her to admit that she was wrong, that she had misjudged him. But Jordan didn't need her apology. He didn't need her validation. "You didn't need to say anything," Jordan said quietly, his voice almost a whisper now. "I already proved what I needed to prove." And with that, he walked away, leaving Claire to grapple with the reality of what had just transpired. Jordan didn't need her apology. He didn't need anyone's approval. What mattered was that in that moment, for the first time in his life, he had taken control of his own story. He had shown her, and everyone else, that he was not just the waiter. He was someone who demanded respect, someone who would no longer be pushed around. And that, he realized, was all he really needed. The days after the confrontation felt surreal to Jordan. It wasn't just the satisfaction of having stood up for himself. It was the way things had shifted in the restaurant. The tension between him and Claire lingered in the air, but it wasn't the same. She was different now, almost avoiding him altogether. Her usual arrogance had faded, replaced with something Jordan couldn't quite put his finger on. But to be honest, he didn't care. For Jordan, the real shift had happened inside himself. A week after the incident, Claire returned to the restaurant, but she wasn't alone. She brought a group of business associates with her this time, and the moment she walked in, Jordan noticed the subtle change. She didn't look at him with the same dismissive glance. There was no condescending tone, no challenge. Instead, there was a hint of respect, something Jordan had never seen in her before. She sat at her usual table, and Jordan made sure to serve her table with the same professionalism he always did. He didn't go out of his way to engage her, but when he did check on her meal, he could see the way her eyes flickered to his, almost like she was seeing him in a completely new light. Jordan wasn't interested in her validation anymore. He had proven his worth, not to her, but to himself. And that was all that mattered. But the changes weren't just external. Jordan noticed something else, something more subtle. The respect he had gained didn't just stop with Claire. It was spreading, slowly but surely. His co-workers, those who had once ignored him or passed off his talents as mere coincidence, now treated him with a newfound respect. One of the bartenders, Carla, had always been a bit dismissive of Jordan, but now she stopped him in the break room one afternoon, offering him a knowing smile. "Hey, Jordan," she said, a bit hesitant at first. "I've been hearing about how sharp you are with languages. It's pretty impressive, man." Jordan smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through him that wasn't just from her words but from the sincerity behind them. "Thanks, Carla," he replied. I've been working on it. A few weeks later, Jordan received a call that would change everything. It was from a recruiter at a prestigious language institute. They had heard about him, about his linguistic talents, his dedication, and his potential. They were offering him a scholarship for an intensive language program, one that would give him the chance to travel, learn, and eventually teach. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. But it was more than that. It was the recognition he had worked for. The recognition that his talents, his intellect, his skills, everything about him was worth something. The offer was a reminder that there was a world beyond the restaurant floor, a world where he could thrive and be seen for who he truly was. Jordan thought about the moment he had stood up to Claire, the way she had been speechless, the way her arrogance had been shattered. In that moment, he hadn't just been speaking languages, he had been speaking his truth. And that truth was that he was more than just the sum of people's expectations. A few days later, Claire approached him again, this time with a different tone. There was no mockery, no challenge. Jordan, she began, her voice surprisingly soft, I owe you an apology for what happened. I wasn't right to make that comment. Jordan didn't hesitate. He didn't need her apology, but he accepted it with grace. I appreciate that, he said, his voice calm but firm. But it's okay. I don't need you to apologize. I just needed you to understand that people like me can't be defined by one moment or one job. We have more to offer. Claire nodded, a moment of mutual understanding passing between them. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was enough. She didn't need to be Jordan's ally. She just needed to realize that underestimating people was always a mistake. As Jordan continued to work at the restaurant, he began to receive more offers, not just from the Language Institute, but from other places too. He was offered freelance translation work, and some of the guests he had served took note of his skills, offering him opportunities in areas he had never imagined. His life was changing, slowly but surely. But it wasn't just about the job offers. It was about the transformation inside him. He no longer saw himself as the waiter who was invisible. He saw himself as someone who was capable of achieving anything he set his mind to. And it was all because of that one moment with Claire, because he had finally stood up for himself and proven his worth. Jordan knew that he still had a long way to go. There would be more challenges, more moments where people would underestimate him, but he was ready. He had learned the most important lesson of all. Never let anyone define who you are or what you're capable of. Life after the incident with Claire felt like a breath of fresh air. Everything seemed to be shifting for Jordan. The respect he had fought so hard to earn wasn't just coming from the people around him, it was coming from within himself. For the first time in his life, he was beginning to understand his own worth, not through the eyes of others, but through his own actions and achievements. The scholarship offer from the prestigious Language Institute had been the catalyst. But now Jordan was looking beyond that. He had received multiple job offers, many of them from companies looking for someone with his unique skill set: linguistics, fluency in multiple languages, and a passion for communication. His reputation as someone who was sharp and driven was spreading. Jordan had become the living proof of what happens when you don't let people's expectations dictate your future. And it wasn't just about the offers and opportunities. It was the way he was seeing himself. The man in the mirror wasn't the shy, quiet waiter anymore. He was a person of value, someone whose talents couldn't be ignored. One evening, as he was finishing his shift at the restaurant, his manager, Tom, called him into the back office. Jordan hadn't expected anything special, but when Tom looked up from his desk, there was something in his eyes that Jordan didn't quite understand. "Jordan," Tom began, "I wanted to talk to you about something. You've been incredible here. Your work ethic, your dedication. It's clear you've got a bright future, and I think you're ready for more." Jordan's brow furrowed, uncertain. "More?" he asked, genuinely curious. Tom smiled, leaning back in his chair. "I've spoken to a few people I know, and there's an opportunity for you to step into a management role. You'd be training new staff, leading shifts, and helping with operations." Jordan felt a rush of surprise and disbelief. He had never even imagined a future like this at the restaurant. Sure, he had dreamed of bigger things, but this was unexpected. You think I'm ready for that? Jordan asked, a hint of doubt in his voice. Absolutely, Tom replied. You've got the leadership skills, the people skills, and you've always shown that you're capable of handling pressure. You're more than just a waiter, Jordan. You're someone who could run this place one day if you wanted to. Jordan took a moment to process it. This was the kind of recognition he had been waiting for. For so long, he had felt invisible. He had been dismissed, underestimated, and mocked. But now people were seeing his potential. He was being offered opportunities that were well beyond what he had ever dreamed of. Still, deep down, Jordan knew he couldn't stay at the restaurant forever. The scholarship offer was a sign that he had to move forward, take risks, and pursue the future he had always wanted. But the recognition from Tom, the respect from his coworkers, and the support from his manager felt like validation, a sign that he had made the right choices. As the weeks passed, Jordan began to feel the weight of his decision. He had been offered the management position at the restaurant, but he had also received an offer to study at the Language Institute full-time. The conflict between the two options weighed heavily on him, but in the end, it was the scholarship that won out. The opportunity to learn, to grow, and to eventually teach was something he had always dreamed of. He submitted his resignation to the restaurant, thanked Tom for the opportunity, and made plans to begin his new journey. The first day at the Language Institute was a whirlwind. Jordan was surrounded by people from all over the world, each of them passionate about languages in their own way. The environment was intense, but Jordan thrived in it. It wasn't just the textbooks or the lessons. It was the atmosphere of ambition and determination. He knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. As he sat in his first class, a moment of clarity washed over him. He wasn't just taking a class. He wasn't just chasing a dream. He was claiming his future. Jordan's life had changed dramatically, but it wasn't just the external circumstances. It was the internal transformation he had undergone. He no longer saw himself as the waiter, the invisible worker behind the scenes. He had become someone who wasn't afraid to challenge expectations and to carve out his own path. It was more than a lesson in language. It was a lesson in self-worth. In the months that followed, Jordan excelled in his studies. His skills and abilities were recognized, and soon enough he was offered a position as a language professor at a university. His dreams had evolved. He was no longer just hoping for a better life. He was living it. And the best part? He never stopped remembering the lesson he had learned that night with Claire. Never let anyone, no matter how powerful or wealthy, define who you are. Jordan had proven that he was more than what they thought of him. He was more than what anyone had ever expected. Jordan sat in his office at the university, his fingers idly tapping the desk. The room was quiet, but his mind was anything but. He thought back to the time when he had been just another waiter, invisible to most, mocked by some, and dismissed by the powerful. Back then, he never could have imagined this life, the one he had worked so hard to build, the one where his talents were not only recognized but valued. He had come so far. But the journey wasn't just about the recognition or the opportunities that followed. It was about the realization that every moment of struggle, every insult, every setback had led him to this point. As he reflected, Jordan realized that the most important lesson he had learned wasn't about how to speak multiple languages or how to prove Claire wrong in front of everyone. The lesson was much deeper than that. The true lesson was about self-worth. It was about standing up for yourself, no matter how the world tried to push you down. It was about knowing that you are not defined by the roles people assign you, by the limits they place on your potential, or by the expectations they impose on you. Jordan had spent so many years trying to fit into a mold, trying to be what others wanted him to be. But when he finally stopped, when he finally embraced who he truly was, that's when everything changed. He realized that no one could define his worth but him. Life wasn't easy, and it wasn't always fair. People would always try to push their limits, test your patience, and challenge your resolve. But Jordan had learned that it wasn't about how hard life could hit you. It was about how you responded to it. Would he let Claire's words define him? Would he let the judgments of others determine his future? He had chosen not to, and it made all the difference. Jordan's journey wasn't just about proving Claire wrong or about making it to a prestigious school. It was about refusing to be invisible. It was about looking at the world with all its assumptions and biases and saying, I am not what you think I am. I am more than that. And that is a lesson that can resonate with everyone. No one gets to tell you who you are. Only you get to decide that. As Jordan stood in front of his class that afternoon, he realized something. This was more than just a job. It was a chance to pass on the lessons he had learned to the next generation, to inspire them to challenge expectations, to never let anyone define them, and to always, always believe in their potential. He had faced so many challenges, and yet here he was, standing as a living example of what it meant to rise above the limitations others tried to place on him. He was living proof that if you stand tall, if you embrace your worth, you can change the world around you. The story of Jordan's journey is one of resilience, empowerment, and growth. It's a story of someone who was underestimated, overlooked, and doubted, but who rose above it all, proving that no one's opinion of you matters more than your own. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt dismissed or underestimated, remember Jordan. Remember that your worth is not defined by what others think of you. You are capable of achieving greatness. You are more than what they see on the surface. And the moment you realize that, your world will begin to shift. If you've ever faced an overwhelming force in your life, share your story in the comments. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button.